So Mel, why don't we start? You tell us your name and where you were from and your parents and your siblings and a little bit about your family.
Okay. I'm Mel Bensman, and I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was born here in 1935, which makes me just about 80. And I grew up in a Russian, Jewish background, or at least I thought it was all Russian and Austrian, and it turned out that I'm also part Spanish. Or the family was, on my father's side, was thrown out of Spain in 1492 or somewhere around those years.
Why do you say Russian? Who came from Russia?
My grandmother and grandfather on my mother's side, and all my aunts and uncles, the ones that I know specifically very well. My grandfather came here in 1906, and he brought a charter from New York to Milwaukee for the Chabad-Lubavitch, which got them. They had already begun years before, but he brought the charter which made them legitimate or kosher.
What was his name?
Joseph Auchel.
Did you know him? Did you grow up with him?
Well, he died in 1940 or 41, I'm not sure. I was at his house on the day he died. He had a heart attack, evidently.
Do you remember him?
Oh, yeah.
What
I
did,
was only about 5 or 6 at the time, but
what did he look like? How did he dress? Did he?
had a beard, white hair, white beard. He was tall. Well, after all, I was small, so to me, he was tall.
What sort of garb did he wear?
I remember overalls. When they came to the U.S., well, my grandmother brought her 7 children in 1911 across Siberia to Mongolia, and then they spent a year in Japan, and then they came through Seattle, which was a totally different route than most people came by to this country. And she joined him in 1911 here in Milwaukee. And they used to go out and they were peddlers. They'd go out to the outer skirts to the farmers and sell whatever they could sell to keep, food on their table. And that was at that time. Later on, they went to work for the Chudnos.
Can you tell us a little bit about your parents? What did they do? Were they religious?
Well, they grew up. My mother grew up here in the city, went to North Division High School. She became a professional dancer and went to Chicago to work later on. She knew the Capones. She always said they were nice people, which didn't go. And later on, when I grew up and I was married, she would take me and my wife and my brother and my sister all up to Little Bohemia to visit. At that time, Frank Capone was the only one left alive up in that area. My aunt, Betty, was a sergeant in the Women's Army Corps. WACs is what they called them at the time. She was, no, the Women's Air Corps, but it was the Army Corps too.
What did your father do for a living?
He was a grocer. But my Aunt Betty flew planes out of Savannah, Georgia. She and her squadron flew planes to England, B-17s, that were used in bombing raids over there.
Did she teach the pilots how to fly the planes?
No, I think she was oh God, she's the one that would look down.
Okay,
She was a navigator,
that's what my grandpa did too.
yeah. But for a woman to do it at that time, that's almost unheard of, and especially a Jewish woman.
Did you grow up with, do you have siblings?
Yeah, I have a brother who died about 3 years ago. I have a sister who lives in Milwaukee, Joan. She lives on the south side.
What language did you speak at home growing up?
I spoke English. By the time I was born, they never spoke Russian around us. They only spoke English because that was a requisite of getting along in this country, they felt. This was their own feeling. They would speak Yiddish on occasion when they didn't want us to know something. I picked up some of it. Very little Russian that I picked up because they never spoke it.
So what can you tell us about Jewish life when you were growing up in your family?
They kept kosher for a while, but they all gradually assimilated a lot. My uncle was a boxer, and he fought a exhibition with Maxie Rosenblum, who was the light heavyweight champion of the world at the time. My uncle was a welterweight. He beat up Maxie. The next time they fought, he was told he could not train for it. These are stories that I know of. They told me stories about life in Russia when they were there, how the troops would come in and go into their houses and stay there for a while.
Anything about Jewish life in Russia?
Not too much about it because they were Jewish and they were automatically, in trouble with the authorities no matter what. I did not distinguish anything as far as a difference between non-Jews and Jews because I grew up on 23rd in Wisconsin, which is very near downtown at the time, before they sent me to California. And I knew nothing about the differences until most of the kids that I played with and went off to parochial school. When they came back, I was fighting all the time. I beat up quite a few of them. And
What kind of school did you attend?
public schools. I also attended the Cheder, the Volksschule. I forgot what the other names were. And my father usually took us during the high holidays. He would take us from one shul to another. So what is now Beth Israel we went to, it was a different shul. You can see it down on Titonia. There's a church now, on Chabad-Lubavitch. I later became president of, never expected to be, but it's funny that the 4 other friends that I have all became presidents of shuls, conservative, and I'm the only one who always gravitated to the more traditional.
Why do you think that is?
I liked it. I still like it. I've always. That's why I come to Minions all the time. And it wasn't because somebody made me a president, I had already done that well before I retired from the Postal Service.
So did your family belong to a synagogue?
Not really. I don't know if they had the kind of membership things that you have nowadays. If they took money, for membership or what, or if people just automatically donated or what have you.
Did you attend synagogue as a kid? Did your family attend synagogue?
Periodically. I did not do my bar mitzvah the way most people do. I came back from California. I was shipped to California. But like my mother, I became a dancer. And they sent me to California to become the next Fred Astaire or Gene Kelly. And I got tired of it out there. I liked my grandmothers, but I didn't think I was good enough to be either of those two guys.
How old were you?
Oh, God, I was in junior high, I think. That's middle school nowadays. I came back to junior high. After I got out, and I joined Habonim, the labor Zionist organization for youth. I was in 1948, I was in the first Israeli dance group that they had put together for the Fair Festival. You know, they'd have an ethnic festival that everybody was in. You'd have all different kinds of group, and that was the first Israeli dance group in 1948, and I was in that up until I left high school and went to Israel in 1954.
How long will you go to Israel for?
I was there for about a year at Kfar Blum in the Galil Elyon. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's the northern Galilee.
Working?
I was there on a work and study program. Abonim was the first organization that came up with that and with camping. And we had a camp in northern Wisconsin that I'd go to. And as I got older, I became their cook once in a while on weekends.
Let's go back to your parents' home. What was Shabbos like in your parents' home? Was there any recognition of Shabbos?
Not in the sense that we do it here.
Well, in what sense?
They were always working. They had 3 different grocery stores over the years. My father had one on Third Street next to Mader's Restaurants, and Hoffman Miller, which was a refrigeration company that still exists to this day. The store that he had now belongs to the Spice House family. They sell spices out of it, and when I walk in there, it looks exactly like it did when I was a kid. Nothing seems to have changed. The only thing is that instead of fruits and vegetables, and they were noted, he and his partner, for their fruits and vegetables. He was offered a chance to become a Kohl, do what Kohl's eventually did, but he never took it. The other store was on Lincoln and KK, Kinnickinnick. It's at a corner. Today it's a Collectivo Coffee. They built a new building there.
So were there any Jewish holidays that were observed at home? Pesach or Rosh Hashanah?
Yeah, we did all of them, and we want to all get together.
So
Both families, all the families.
Tell me about Pesach in your parents' home. Did you do a Seder? Did you have matzah? Where'd you get it from?
They tried to do a Seder. I never paid attention because I was young. I didn't care. The same thing, that's why I did my bar mitzvah on a Thursday morning at the shul. It wasn't done in the traditional manner that other people did.
What'd you do?
They brought me down there. They had somebody read the bafter. I know it wasn't me because I hadn't learned it. I used to walk from 23rd in Wisconsin out to 43rd and Villard to go study, but I never did. I was too tired to really study for it.
Who'd you study with?
His name was Mar Pace, Mr. Pace.
But you said you went to Cheder?
Yeah.
Every day, once a week?
On the weekends for sure. During the week sometimes. Yeah, we went on after school, public school. But nobody ever explained anything to me. Not in the way that Shmaya does now, explains to everybody. Or you. Or,
So what did you learn in Cheder?
I learned more in Habonim and in the army with a friend of mine who had been to the yeshiva in New York. He had studied to be a rabbi, but decided against it.
Did your parents ever build a sukkah?
No,
Did you know what a sukkah was growing up?
I heard about it, but I never did, really.
Are there any Jewish memories in your parents' home that do come to mind? Any things, and maybe from your grandparents?
Oh, we'd get together for Passover and that, and all of it.
So what's something interesting or unique that you can tell us about your father? What kind of person? I understand he ran a grocery.
Oh, he played for the Green Bay Packers in the 1920s when they first started up. He went to high school in Sheboygan.
Who?
My father, that's where they lived. He went to high school in Sheboygan, was a fullback on the high school team, the Sheboygan Redskins, which was a what do you call it, a semi-professional team, and the Packers. And he broke his shoulder and lost the scholarship to Wisconsin because of it. But in those days, a lot of these guys played for all kinds of teams. There was a guy named Jimmy Blood who played for the Packers, who played for Boston College, and who played for Notre Dame all at the same time, half the time. Nobody knew where these guys were officially signed up. They played under different names, so you can't even find. Everybody knew about Jimmy Blood because he was one fine halfback.
Really?
Yeah, but
So does that give you Packer tickets for life?
no, it never gave me anything. That's all right. I didn't really know about all of it until, oh God, my brother was the one that told me about it.
So is there one memory of your childhood that stands out, or something that stands out?
No, the things like when I went to Los Angeles to be a dancer and all that. My time in the Army, I was in the all.
So tell us about
Army
your time in the
shows.
Army, but how old were you? What'd you do? Were you drafted?
I was, when I went to Israel, I received a deferment from the Army, from the draft, thanks to Hubert Humphrey, who was a senator from Minnesota. So I went for a year, and it was under the condition that I return, so that somebody else could go and I would go into the Army. When I got back and went to the draft board to sign up, they said, we won't need you now. I said, baloney. I said, I didn't come 6,000 miles and then you turn around and tell me that you didn't need me now. I said, you're going to put me in. So they put me in as a volunteer for the draft. I went into the Army after 1 year. I was at Fort Riley, Kansas, and then I went to Fort Ord, California. The second one no longer exists. That was for infantry training. And they asked you in those days what you wanted to be in the Army. And I looked at them and I said, you're going to ship all of us to infantry anyhow. So just send me. All the other guys signed up for something else. They all followed me because I was right. I did. But when I volunteered and re-enlisted to go to Germany. And I went to headquarters 7th Army in Germany, And I also was in the all-army shows over there,
Dancing.
dancing and as a comedian. And I had a partner. I had two partners that I worked with over there. One spoke Hopi Indian. The other one spoke Spanish and a few other choice languages. I spoke a little bit of Arabic, Hebrew, and German, because I had learned that already while I was there.
What did you do in the Army?
I was a clerk in the ordnance section. We were involved in the first Lebanon crisis in, when was it, 1954, 55, no, 55.
What's one memory from the Army that stands out?
We were, for Pesach, we brought in the commanding general of the European sector. He later became the general in command. And they have them. What do they call it? They're all in. There's about 5 of them that from the different services that are top generals and admirals and what have you.
Jewish guy?
No, he wasn't Jewish, although I think his last name was Abrams. I think he commanded the Korean War. I'm not sure, or was it Vietnam?
What do you mean you brought him in for Pesach?
We invited him to our Pesach celebration in Germany, in Stuttgart, Germany, where I was stationed. My friend Alex Steinkohler did most of the service. We had a rabbi, and they said the best thing he could do was become a butcher.
Did you have matzah there?
Yes, we had it made special. It was unusual to get matzah. You couldn't get matzah in Germany, but we had it made special. And General Abrams, or the general, commanding general, whatever his name was, he, when we got to the part where somebody had stolen the Afikoman, he got red in the face, and he got down on his hands and knees and started crawling around under the table looking for it. We explained to him, no, that's not you, it's for the kids, and so on.
What year was this?
About 1954, 56, I think.
Did you interact with any local Jews at the time?
Yeah, but most of those were people that came back to Germany from Israel. And they were involved in, they ran nightclubs and things like that there, because most people after the Holocaust did not want to be part of the German scene.
What was it like being a Jewish soldier? Were there other Jews? Was there anything unique about being?
Yeah, I had some friends and that, and then there was a sergeant came up to me. This was before that. He said his name was Sergeant Andrews, and he said he was Jewish. And I said to him, "You're not going to play those games with me." I said, "What are you trying to pull?" And he said, "No, I'm Jewish." I said, "I never heard of a sergeant, of anybody with the name Andrews being Jewish." He said, "Well, I am." And that was the first time I ran into somebody like that. They would come to the services wherever we had them.
Did you have any exposure to tefillin in the Army or growing up?
Not tefillin. We did, I saw them, but nobody ever told me what they were for, why we did it. And I asked a particular rabbi here about it, not in this shul, obviously. I asked him about it. He said it's too expensive.
So how long were you in the Army for?
4 years. My brother came over while I was there. My father died while I was on my second trip to Israel. We took one trip to Israel while I was there. I went to visit my cousins at Moshab Merchavia, and he said, I'm going to take you down to our army base. This was when Eisenhower and I forgot who his Secretary of State was. And I walked in, and they showed me the equipment that they had captured from the Egyptians in the Sinai War in '56. And I looked at this stuff, and I said, you know what? You've got better equipment than we have, and we're in Europe, and we're supposed to be protecting Europe from the Soviet Union. They had captured stuff that this
Really?
government had given to the Egyptians. They didn't know how to take care of it.
What was Yom Kippur like in your family or in the army?
We didn't eat anything.
You fasted.
Yeah,
Did you go
that
to
was something that my mother would have let us if we wanted to as kids, but we fasted and they fasted.
Did you go to synagogue?
Yes, my father would take us for Yom Kippur and for Rosh Hashanah. We would go to all the different ones. There was an entire area around Titonia and Reservoir where you had all the synagogues at that time.
Did you experience any anti-Semitism while you were in the army?
Not really. First of all, I had learned how to handle guns while I was in Israel. I had a reputation as being they made me a squad leader before they made me a company clerk, and then they shipped me into headquarters 7th Army because I could type. And that was somebody there weren't too many people that knew how to type. They could shoot.
So when did you meet Barbara?
I came back from the Army. I met her that summer. And I took her out. In fact, we were at the Jewish Center. My brother and I were on a bowling team, and he was a much better athlete than I was. He was a 300 bowler most of the time. Yeah, he was a better passer. What's funny is we both put together, this was before I had gone off to the Army and that, we put together a Jewish basketball team that we took, and it played in the Catholic League down under, on the south side on 6th Street in that area. I never knew what this was until I got there.
So other than that, did you experience any other anti-Semitism?
Yeah, once at school when I was at Peckham Junior High School, which later became Jackie Robinson Middle School, and before I went to Washington. I said something to a girl on a stairwell once, and she called me a rather unflattering name. And I didn't, whatever I said to her, it wasn't anything bad. Because I didn't do that. You wouldn't do that in those days in school. Because the first thing, the police in those days didn't shoot you. They picked you up, they took you to see the principal, then they took you to see your parents, and that was it. I remember one time when I was in high school and we did some stuff that we weren't supposed to. I beat the fastest runner in the state of Wisconsin. But the cops caught up with me and I had to paint somebody's fence.
Community service?
Yeah. No doubts about it. My parents were not too happy with me.
Do you feel that growing up, being Jewish was an important part of your family? Or was it
Not
sort of,
my mother and them. They were happy that I went to Israel. They were happy to an extent that I was involved in Habonim.
after you married Barbara, can you tell us about your children? I know Mindy, and about Jewish life in your house, when you were in Barbara's home.
Well, Barbara and I both were brought up secularly, more or less. And I met her, and I told her at the time that I was going to marry her. I did within 6 to 8 months after I met her. And my mother-in-law kept herd on us most of the time. In those days, if I took her out, I had a Mercedes 300, which was a big car, and I would pull it up in front of her house, and we'd sit there and talk. And then her mother would flash the lights for us to come in. So one time I came in, and she said, "Don't you think it's time you went home?" And I said, "Yes, but I'll go home, but don't ask me to come in anymore."
So, and how many children did you have?
2, Mindy and Debbie. Deborah was the first one. She was born, let's see, about a year and a half after we were married, something like that.
How old
In
were
fact, it's her birthday next week.
you? How old were you when you got married? And how old was Barbara?
Let's see, I think I was 23. Barbara was 20, or no, 30, 25 years younger, 18, something like that.
And so, did you celebrate holidays in your house? Did you send your kids to a Hebrew school? Was Judaism part
We
of it?
always sent them to Hebrew school. We started with a conservative shul that was on Appleton Avenue at the time. I was pretty involved with that one. We saved the rabbi's job one year, myself and some friends of mine. And over the summer, they fired him while we were all on vacation. So after that, Barbara and I were married at Anshe Spard. That was before it was joined with Kehillat Torah. And that was by Rabbi Shapiro, who was considered at the time the most intellectual rabbi in the city. I liked him. I liked his wife. They went to Israel later.
Did you celebrate holidays in your home?
Yes, but we were not very strict. To this day, I was rather surprised when we had grandchildren that Barbara would set aside a kosher plates, pots, and pans and everything so that we could take care of our grandchildren. But that was no problem for either of us.
Are you pleased that your grandchildren are Orthodox or the type of lifestyle that they have?
I am, yes.
Why?
I like the schooling they get. I like what they're learning. And because of that, my daughter and her children, I wound up here because I was president of Chabad-Lubavitch and tried to fold them back into this at the time. We were going to bring them back to their roots. But the membership that's left over there didn't want to do it. And the rabbi didn't want to do it. And he would have, from my standpoint, he would have been better off because we would have put him in, let's say, Foxcroft or something like that, and he would have places he could go to without, a major problem. Plus, we had, up until the last 2 or 3 years, we had full minions there 3 times a day or twice a day, 7 days a week. And gradually, as they became older and succumbed to age, which is natural, they couldn't replace them. So,
Do you think it's important, the lifestyle that your grandchildren have?
yes, and it's
Why?
important for me too.
Why? And I think my question is, why and what can you tell the next generation from your experience about the importance about being involved?
It, for most part, it helps you understand where you come from. My mother had told me I was a lady. It never made any sense to me until I told that to Rabbi Reichman, and then after that he told me I had never knew what they did when you went up to a minyan, you know, any of that. It made no sense because I'd see it, but nobody explained what it was for or why we did it in those days. If you got out of line, all they did was yell at you. You guys don't do that. Plus, it's to me, it's a great thing, and I've said this over and over again. Every time somebody asks me, I love it when you have all these kids running around in here. It means we're still alive. And I don't have any problems with that. And my grandchildren know who they are and what they are and why they are. And that's happy. That makes me happy, and it makes Barbara happy. It's one of the benefits of coming back from Arizona. And plus, I miss this while I'm out there because in Arizona, I'm 30 to 35 miles away from the nearest shul.
So don't you find it interesting that you enjoy this, but it's so different than what you grew up with?
No, because I recognize a lot of this stuff, and I did this over at Chabad-Lubavitch, even though they tried to make it more modern. We did this, basically. Some of the tunes that you use here are basically the same ones we did there. I always feel out of place when I go to a Reformed or a conservative shul, synagogue.
Why?
They don't do what we do. And I have a better understanding when I sit and read the Chumash or the Seder of what I'm doing.
Can you, just before we run out of time, can you tell us a little bit about what you did and your work at the post office and if being Jewish played any sort of role in that or affected you in any way?
It didn't get me the job, if that's what you're asking.
Well,
No, I was a letter carrier for 19 years. The remaining 12 years, I was in top management because I had been going to school on the Army for years. And I was supposedly going to go to Marquette for the history, in the history department. But they didn't want anybody, they told me at the time, that I had to give up my job. And I said, well, I'm married and I have 2 children. I can't afford to give up them. But they said they were going to send me to Washington to do my thesis. And I said, well, I can't do that. So I went and utilized what I knew from going to school for about 12 years of nights and summers. I utilized that in my job at the post office. So I moved up the ladder pretty fast. And I liked working with the people downtown. First of all, it allows me to be with a lot of different people who come from different backgrounds. Very few people I know have had that experience. On a given night, when I ran the main post office, I had 1,000 people I was responsible for. I had 25 supervisors, 5 general supervisors, and the rest of them were clerks and mail handlers. And it was my responsibility to see that all the mail in a given night had to go and get out on time and get to where it was supposed to be. And but I loved the people. So, and some of them said I was pretty tough, but later on they said they were glad because I was right in their face and they were right in my face when they knew what they were supposed to do when I told them that. I taught management for the Postal Service all over the state of Wisconsin, and in Nebraska they sent me there. I was on the special group that we would check and see that the various post offices, including the Chicago post office, were functioning the way they were supposed to. Things like that. In fact, I still do that when I walk into an organization and I see how they're operating, especially if it's a business organization.
Did you ever take off for Jewish holidays? Was that
Always.
ever a problem?
No. The hardest thing, though, was I always had to be off in April when I was in charge because nobody else wanted. They had kids, younger kids. My kids were already going to college. And I had to take off for Easter because the other guys couldn't do it. They had kids and they had to be home. They weren't going to go to Florida or this, that, and the other thing. So we took off at Easter. I always thought it was funny. When I was in the Army, I worked every Christmas Eve and every New Year's Eve. It was automatically mine.
So can you tell us a little bit about taking off for Jewish holidays? Was that a problem? Did people understand?
No,
Was that common?
that was already, in the government, that's a given. There are some rules that say you can't do it, but they never hold true. John F. Kennedy was the first president to make it, by president's ruling. And after that, it stayed with us all the time I was there.
What kind of schools did you send your kids to?
Public school.
Public school.
Yeah, they went through. I was heavily involved during the years we stayed in Milwaukee, and I was heavily involved in integrating Milwaukee's public schools. I was very strong about that. In fact, I got elected to every position there was. I had to introduce the man who was designated by, what was it? A man who was brought to Milwaukee to introduce the integration program. And
in the public schools?
yeah, I had to introduce him to the Northwest Side. And the week before in Toledo, that guy and the guy who introduced him got shot. And it was funny because there were people there yelling at the time and all that, but I introduced him. I got him in there, and we asked him questions. Oh, he was a former Postmaster General, John Gronowski. And later on, 4 years later, I was in the court case, and they were trying to decide if they were going to pay the attorneys who brought the original suit. And I had researched the prior suits elsewhere and found that Milwaukee met most of the conditions. And I woke up former Governor Reynolds, who was now a judge. I woke him up because he fell asleep while people were there trying to make their concerns heard. And I was up there in front of him. I said, Judge, will you please wake up? These people want you to hear what they have to say, because he was the person that was going to determine if the attorneys get paid. Frankly, I wanted them to continue it a few
Well-
more years.
What was the outcome?
It wasn't as bad as a lot of people made out. They paid them. They integrated all the Milwaukee public schools on both sides of town. My neighbors, a lot of them wanted to move out of town because they said they didn't approve of busing. So they moved to places like West Bend and what have you, and their kids were being bused all over the place. In fact, farther than here. It would have been here. I later on came to the same position that the judges out east did. That instead of busing people or moving, the kids, making the kids responsible for the integration program, they should have made sure that all these suburbs were integrated. In other words, keep the housing open, not by virtue of the fact that housing was too expensive for the poor.
Okay, before we wrap up, is there anything else that comes to mind that you want to share?
No.
Okay. Yasher koach.
Thank you.